Hello and welcome to Equipment for Living. I'm your host, Dan Bullen. Today it's my great privilege to sit down with Dr. Imo Imeh, who's the Associate Professor of Art and Art History at Westfield State University. Your art does things, it's like you do art and then some, I feel like. Imo brings, what he brings to his art is not just the beautiful stuff you see behind you, and we'll show you some more of that. But he's bringing a sense of social justice, a sense of history, a sense of education, a sense of community to the work and to the performance of the work that I think makes this really rich. And I feel very fortunate to sit down with you to have this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate it.
The place that I guess I'd like to start is to ask, where did it start for you? It sounds like you were always drawing, but what did drawing do for you?
Drawing has always given me a chance to escape over painting, over everything else. Opening up a fresh batch of paper and the smells that come from that, and I'm feeling graphite on my fingers and charcoal and colored pencil literally transports me into another place. And then sitting for hours and just working to learn more about myself and to do a little bit of healing. So all of those things have made drawing, since I can remember, a very special thing for me.
So I guess my question next would be, what was it like choosing that as a thing you were going to spend your life on? Because a lot of kids draw, a lot of kids go to these other places and find those mirrors and find the richness. And then a lot of people get their knuckles slapped and say, you have to stop that.
Yeah, so the knuckle slapping is still happening, by the way. There's still people that pull me aside and slap my knuckles. Yeah. It doesn't matter.
You have to stop this. You have to grow up.
You have to grow up.
Right. Grow up is usually how it gets expressed.
And for me, it's an awful thing. It's awful that that's done. Because the very same people who are knuckle slapping will say, what are we going to do this Saturday? Let's go to the Metropolitan Museum. Let's look at art.
Right.
Here, we sit you in front of this cartoon while I make your eggs.
Right.
But somebody had to design that.
Sure.
Or play on their phone, and a designer had to design that to make you want to hold that phone. And so the knuckle slapping is frustrating when I see it happening to younger people now. Why did I choose it? Or how did I choose it?
Did you have to choose it with resistance then?
Yes, but the choosing happens in stages.
Sure.
And so in many ways, I feel like it chose me, and I went along with it. And I knew. I walked into Columbia Law School as a junior in undergrad. I walked into Columbia Law School because I was going to apply to law school. So that's what I was going to do as an art history major, undergrad. And I had all the LSAT tests ready, all the practice tests, and I walked into Columbia Law School and walked around and got a feel for the space. And all I could think about was how undecorated it was. I was like, there's nothing on these. And I knew. And I had a long talk with both of my parents individually, and who both encouraged me to follow my heart, which is a big deal.
So they were on your side?
Yes, for the most part.
Great.
My mom signed me up for art classes. I ran with them. So I found it and it found me and it made sense. And so my parents didn't have a whole lot of argument they could bring up. Like, my mom, very, very African. Very Nigerian mother. Not even a pharmacist. None of you all will go into medicine. None of you. So like the pharmacist is like the lowest rung of medicine for her. Like no, not even a pharmacist. Although I thought about medical illustration and by day and by night I'll be a muralist. But I knew.
Yeah.
And so what saved me in part was realizing that I also had research questions. This sensitive, oversensitive artist who went to an art high school, who went to a very academic undergraduate institution, would find a way to flourish in the field of visual art by asking good questions and doing good research. Right?
So one of the things I found in the introduction you wrote to your book was, I think there's the second paragraph, you gave an explicit and prolonged thanks to God, that the religion was something that really made you, it was a big part of who you were. And the part that really stuck for me was that you hoped that this was a good work. Right? And so I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, because I don't think you just mean good work, like beautiful, well executed. I feel like there's a human quality to that that I think shows in the rest of your work and the way that you speak about it and the way that it gets performed in community, right? But this relationship to the mentoring, and then to return to my question, to having God as the ground for that, that sounds like a unique history.
Yeah, wow, that you caught that. That just hearing you repeat that is
no, it was moving.
It's very emotional for me just hearing that as well. I just don't think that any of this matters outside of God. And because at the end, these are materials, right? This is charcoal, pigments that somebody made, you know. At the end of the day, these are materials. But the idea that these materials can come together to literally change minds about something, or to cause people to behave in a different way. I mean, think about the song that means the most to you, or the last song that caused you to feel inspired when you were depressed. It's just a set of materials and skills, but you can literally change the world using these things that are going to go back into the earth, right? And so I have to believe that this is greater than having an exhibit. It'd be great to exhibit at the Studio Museum in Harlem and all of these other spaces and have access to all of that. All of those things would be wonderful. And I hope they come. But if I lose this sense of being able to change even one heart or one mind with these materials, then I just don't know what this is for. And I believe that the power to do that comes from God. I believe strongly in that. The latest projects I've worked on have been as much a part of helping me see that this is bigger than me. You know, sorry. I don't believe that. I believe the world can change. I do believe that. I think that it's. If I have no reason, if I can't see my work as something that can actually translate into change, I don't see the point in doing it. And so if it's making a work of art in an exhibit somewhere and noticing that there's a child standing in front of it, literally taking notes because they don't know what to do, and understanding, not knowing exactly what they took notes on, and I've seen this, but understanding that they're going home with this and it's done something to their heart, I believe that's a God thing. And we have these skills, and that God chooses to use us to impact the world is a big deal to me. And so I hope that I never lose that sense. And in my regard, there's an advocacy component to it, you know, where people need help. But for somebody else, it could just be speaking to the beauty that is in the world. And that can be life-changing as well. It's not about literally advocacy, but it's like, can't you see how beautiful this world actually is?
Well, sure. Beauty is definitely a kind of advocacy, right?
And it can be life-changing.
It's teaching you.
Right.
It's teaching you things that the regular world is teaching against.
Right.
I would say.
And so it's in that way that I hope that these are good works. I don't want these projects I'm working on to just be another project, another footnote, another, you know, if it didn't do something to actually push somebody into a greater sense of their purpose, then I just don't know what the point is. And that's what I mean. That's what I mean by that statement. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. Whose art did that for you in the beginning? Like, who gave you that scent to follow? To be not just an artist making marks the way that you make marks, but to be an artist the way that you are an artist in a community?
I don't feel like it was modeled for me. I feel like it's happening because it made sense to happen, if that means anything. It's so much of what I do is tied to my belief in God. So much of what I do is tied to this idea that art should, this is what I used to say. I was like, I was in college when I started saying this, that art should grow legs and do something. And so this idea of making a painting, for example, or making a drawing that can wind up sending someone else to college, like that art should have arms and legs, or this idea of spreading the love of God through art. Like, is it possible for someone to enter a museum space and forget for a moment that they're in a museum because of an encounter with a work, and immediately feel not that this is an artwork, but that this is a direct connection to God? It's in that way that I look at my projects. The most recent one, 17 Years Boy. Is there a way to tell a history of trauma, but to also activate healing? Is that possible? Real healing, not like healing and now it's time to heal after we have the conversation about race that we're always supposed to be having after something traumatic happens, right? No, not that. Is it actually possible to activate healing with art? I'm not concerned about whatever boundaries exist. Because another mentor of mine, his name is Eric Williams, I still call him, like, I think I want to work on a project, but I don't know how to start. But one of the things he told me a while ago is, you're going to be operating at a rhythm that it just may take the rest of the world to figure out this rhythm. Don't you worry about the fact that other people can't figure it out yet.
Great.
Right now, you just do the thing. You just do the thing. And let it exist. And let it do what it needs to do. Don't you worry about everybody else. Everybody else will catch up. And so...
But that's like lifeblood to an artist.
It's great. Because it took this weight of having to explain everything completely off of me. But there's something great about being able to be in the moment and be the artist along with audience and be equally confused about the thing that has just happened. And I was the progenitor in part of that thing, and they were the recipients. And we're all confused. Now let's really talk. Let's figure this out. It's not over. That's part of the artwork, I think. That's part of the beauty of this thing. And so not being burdened with the weight of figuring out the best way to explain the messaging and reach that person, not my worry. And I don't think it needs to be. I'd like to think that there are fresh things, there are fresh ideas and fresh new ways I'm presenting ideas that are fresh and cool and crisp enough that they can activate something new ways of thinking, without me having to worry about explaining, well, there's a tie to this and so on and so forth. And so, and that's relatively new thinking for me. But I will say that it's that mentor of mine and a few others have inspired me from youth to not be overly concerned with explaining
reception
everything.
And what
reception
people are
and
taking away.
what will they say and what will they do? And you realize that there's an artist that already did this, and I'm like, well, that artist doesn't know me. But
at the same time, you're there. Maybe this is the way that I kind of saw it. I think in writings that I saw on your website that you'd said that a lot of or a big impetus for your work is to give voice to people who don't have a voice.
Yes.
And to bring things into presence that are typically in our world removed from presence. So the death of black boys is just something we hide. It's that violence is just not supposed to be seen. Or if we see it, it's supposed to be somehow reduced to a punchline. But we're not supposed to actually feel those things. So I feel like maybe what's behind my question is, I feel like you're finding those experiences in people who don't know that they're having those experiences, and then giving them the language to engage with their own self.
I've learned along the way that this is more of what is happening. There's a lot of this is happening. There's something that the artwork that I'm creating has done to speak directly to certain people about themselves. That is something, interestingly enough, that I can't say that I set out to do necessarily, but I'm learning that is something that's happening. Even if it's never shown or it's never experienced, doesn't take away its value. It doesn't take away its value for why it was being created. People are connecting with the work in a way that I didn't necessarily expect, which is always great. And then there's something inside of me that's happening as I'm working on them, and I'm learning about who I am. And then there's this other stage, this other thing that it's like, I've got to be satisfied with the fact that this thing exists, even if no one else ever sees it. This thing did something. It's doing something. It did something. It'd be wonderful if it was in somebody's home or in a museum, but this thing covered up in my space has to mean something before it's projected elsewhere. It has to. Or what is the point of this?
Yeah.
Because for me, at the very core, it's like, oh my gosh, this thing needs to exist. Immediately after this project, 17 Years Boy, once the installation came down, I was hit with a set of images and writing that was so strong that I couldn't leave the house. I was like, well, I have to go to the gym. And I'm like, my arm is like, and I'm writing, and I'm grabbing paper and the images are there and there are sentences, there are poetry phrases. There's gonna be a lot of text in the next set of works, but it's clear as day to me, to a degree, what I'm supposed to do. That doesn't always happen. But so that thing needs to exist. There are people who will be touched by it. There are people who will be offended by it. Not my business. Right now it's like, oh my gosh, like this thing is kicking.
You have to make it happen.
It has to go. I've called in, I've ordered the materials, and I'm like, well, this is gonna be interesting. Let me clear the studio. And so it's in that way. So you're meeting me right now in a very, very, very interesting a space of something serious is about to happen. And I'm nervous about it, and I'm terrified, and I'm excited all at the same time. So in that way, right now, this thing just needs to exist. That's how 17 Years Boy started. It was like, this thing needs to exist, and then everything else will work the way it's supposed to.
Can you talk a little bit about what it was like being mentored into that history? Because the history that you're using as a material here, that you have this freedom with as an artist, is also a really heavy history in a culture that it doesn't even want to know that history exists a lot of the time.
I find it so helpful that you recognize how significant the historical part of what I do is, like in terms of not just the historical part, but that I as art historian, it's like you as artist and art historian are making something happen, perhaps in a way that somebody else couldn't. One of my mentors from the art side in high school, David Pachter, told me that, as much as he liked my art and he believed I was meant to be something great as an artist, he's like, if you're not taking art history classes, I can't even talk to you. That was his way of getting me to take the class. He's like, I don't take you seriously if you don't take art history. So, and over the years, the history of visual art, which I thoroughly enjoyed, the object study, the study of objects and images, is something that was really paired with the history of Black and brown people, and then into African art as well. But I never got past this social kind of art history of Black and brown people, especially in European and American spaces. And so that has informed my art. It still does. The first time I'd known about lynching photography. I'd sort of known about it. I'd understood it in a very casual way. But my first real dive into American history and really the things that were done to the Black body was in college. That's too late.
Yeah.
That's too late.
Yeah.
It was a sophomore in college.
Yeah. Although I almost wonder if you need to be at least that age because it's so heavy that
It's
to know about it
heavy.
earlier would be really hard.
That's
I mean,
true.
it's hard at any
I've
age,
thought about that
but
too.
to know that you know
Yeah.
where the word picnic came from
Yeah.
and how thousands of people would gather to watch these ritual mutilations was that changes how you go about your business in the rest of your day.
It's such a big part of our history.
Right.
It is such a major part of American history that just isn't discussed. And so there's this huge hole in American history where you know, at some point in time, the slaves are free, and then women get the right to vote, and then there's civil rights in the 60s. It's like, wait, there's a lot.
And Obama, so we're done.
And now we're
finished.
Obama. So, you know, what do you want? Pick yourself up by the bootstraps, let's go, you know?
Yeah.
And so there isn't a real conversation that can happen. We don't have a sense of how to move forward because we don't deal with these things. There is a traditional art historian inside of me. He's very purist, and he loves the whole idea of the object study. I was taught very well. My now colleagues at Yale and Columbia did a good job. They trained me. This is what art history is. Not that, young man, this is what it is. Fine. For me, this needs to extend now into, and it has begun, all right, in the field, thankfully. But
in the field of art history.
In the field of art history, which is really beginning to, certain scholars are bringing in critical race history into it, which is good.
Do you feel like the art historian in you and the artist in you pull in different directions, or do they just kind of loop back and feed each other?
They loop back and feed each other. I mean, if I were a really, really, really good art historian, though, I'd be working on publishing a lot more. I get these moments when I'm ready to write, and then this calls, and so for me, it's a weird thing. But I do feel like if I don't begrudge the tension that they have, the tension that they seem to have for each other. If I don't fight the tension, there is an interesting braid that begins to happen. I mean, the reason why 17 Years Boy happened is because the art historian and the historian in me was like, here's a problem that just took place on my campus, and I'm going to take everybody down memory lane of 6 years. And let's just talk about something that happened 6 years ago, and people would say, why? And I'm like, because I'm a historian. The finale, the 17th hour of 17 Years Boy, where the painting is ceremoniously destroyed by lottery. Nobody knew this was going to happen. The painting of Trayvon Martin is destroyed in this performance space where for 4 days, over 17 hours, I had been a black spectacle, and we talked about all these things without speaking, right? The emails and the calls that I got after that asking me, what should we do? Or what was that just happened? Or what is it that I experienced? I didn't have the answers for that, you know? But that doesn't mean that thing should not have existed.
Right. One of in the history camp, the quote that I love from the history camp is from the Roman historian Sallust. He said, "These things never happened, they always are." Right? The pastness is a myth. The same thing is happening. And when we don't believe that people exist, when we say that their stories don't matter, what we're saying is the same thing that's always been said.
Right.
And so I think this is why I'm always drawn to the artists, but increasingly more to the biographers. And I want to know about the artists' lives more than I want to know about the art. I want to know how the people lived to carry that into the world, because you are bringing something new. You are taking that history into figures who carry it for you, and then the figures go forth through the exhibitions, through the books, what have you.
This is such an interesting work that you're doing, because even just the questions that you're asking and the things that you're considering, you know, people ask me questions all the time. I'm going to get plenty more questions about what it is I'm doing. Sometimes working through answering the questions helps me as an artist understand a little bit more what it is I'm actually trying to do. I like that debate, but there's something useful about the process of answering the questions as they come. And this is, in a way, has been really, really refining for me. In a way, it's hard to do.
Are there particular voices that you that you associate with that kind of the world getting in the way of that, or the world dampening that you've entered into a dialogue with it, or you just say the light has to shine, so I have to stay and shine?
This has been since I was young. I'm just like, look, this is like, if I don't do this, we're all gonna be very, very unhappy.
Right.
Especially those of you.
I think the really beautiful way you put it on your website was that without these stories being told, we were all diminished.
It's true. It's true. So I still have my moments where I'm like, man, I'm throwing these brushes away. I'm getting rid of this. I'm getting rid of the studio. I'm fighting law school. I'm getting rid of my professorship. I'm not doing this anymore. It's like I have these moments, and they're increasingly more short-lived. But I still have these moments where I'm just like, what is the point of this? I don't know how to draw. I lied to myself. They lied to me. I can't do this. And it's funny to be around a community of artists who we all go through that. Like, what are we doing? Like, it's material. Like, I can tear this paper. Why does this matter? Why does this matter? And so coming back to a place of understanding that these are just tools, and there's something bigger that's being translated through these. That's an important thing. There was a larger point I was going to make, but I lost it. Sorry.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of stuff in the air at this point.
Which is, I like it. Yeah. I think it's wonderful.
No, it's great.
We can pick and just decide.
Yeah.
I love it.
Totally. Thank
I
you.
hope it's not messing up your interview.
No.
All right, that's good.
I think this actually might be a great place to wrap it up. So
all right.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate this. This has been wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in, y'all. We'll see you next time.